The human brain is a fascinating subject. Our brain starts to develop in the third week of gestation and possibly continues to do so throughout our lifetime. It changes structurally as we age and more so compared to any other part of our body. Today we are going to talk about what happens to our brain as we age and how can we keep it agile and young. And to answer all of these questions, we have with us Dr. Masta Tirel. Dr. Tirel is a neurosurgeon at the Wockhardt Hospitals in South Mumbai, and he's also an honorary assistant professor of neurosurgery at the Grant Medical College and Sir JJ Group of Hospitals. Hi, Dr. Tirel. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi. It's always a pleasure to be back on your show.
Well, I'm going to jump right into my questions. I was actually listening to one of your talks, and you said that even neurosurgeons who look inside people's brains so frequently know so little about it. I want to know what you meant by it, and I'm also curious about what the human brain looks like and what happens to it as we age.
So we look at the brain on a daily basis. Being neurosurgeons, we keep opening up the head, but its functionality is still very mysterious. Though we know the gross elements of its function, at a deeper level, at a cellular level, uh, a lot of the parts of the brain are still unexplored. And definitely, I mean, when you look at the brain, when you uh, open it up, the brain is covered physically by a thick leathery like membrane. It's called the dura mater. It's what protects the brain. And then when you open the dura, you see the pristine brain. It looks beautiful, especially when you look at it under the microscope. You see gyri and sulci. Sulci are those tiny grooves into the brain, and gyri are the bulges that you see, and then you see blood vessels that are traversing from one segment to the other. And it's probably, if you look at the brain under the microscope, it's one of the most astounding organs you can ever imagine. It's just ethereal in some sense, it's very majestic. It's extremely difficult to put into words.
I also want to understand the difference between a young and an old person's brain. Do they look different? Do they function differently? Tell us more about that.
Definitely. If you look at a young adult's brain, it's fuller in the sense that there's very little space between the dura mater and the actual brain itself. It's a slightly tighter brain. It's doesn't have that much of laxity. As we age, the brain tends to atrophy a little. It becomes a little smaller,
Right.
and so the spaces open up a little bit. The younger brain is a little softer. The older brain is slightly harder.
Right.
The vessels are slightly more calcified. You can actually see the calcification within tiny blood vessels in an older brain. In a younger brain, it's much less so. So
Right.
the differences are definitely very distinct, especially if you open up a brain of a 30, 40-year old as opposed to a 60, 70-year old.
Mhm.
There's a huge difference just physically looking at it.
Right.
And the infant brain is even more enigmatic and nicer. It's got a slightly pinkish hue to it,
Mhm.
as opposed to an adult brain that is slightly paler, and uh, the aging brain is even more pale if you're just looking at physical comparisons.
Right. Right. So that means that they also function differently.
Of course, I mean, as you age, the cognitive faculty of the brain, like with any other organ of the body, tends to decrease a little bit.
Right.
And so you peak when you're about 25 or so, and then you can keep that peak for a couple of decades, and then usually after 50, 60, it tends to plateau or slowly drop depending on a host of factors, which is really very difficult to pinpoint what will actually determine how a brain functions at the age of 70 or 80.
Right. Right. I was also reading that the human brain needs about 500 calories every day to function, which is almost a fourth of our daily energy requirement. Does that imply that if we don't get adequate nutrition, it is going to impact our brain?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at it, the brain weighs only about 1.5 kilos,
Right.
about 1.5 to 2 kilos, and it uses about 20%. So it weighs about 2% of the body weight,
Mhm.
but it takes up about 20% of the body's energy or the oxygen.
Right.
So definitely, I mean, the brain uses calories even when you're thinking, even when you're a lot of processes going on emotionally, etc. So definitely, nutrition is important, but it's not like if you starve for a day, it's going to affect your it'll definitely affect you. Start becoming a little foggy. You start becoming a little drowsy. You're not thinking clearly. So the brain does require a decent amount of glucose on a regular basis. So if you starve for beyond a day, you'll
Right.
start feeling those effects.
Right.
So it's extremely important to have a healthy diet if that's what you're getting at.
Right. Does that also work with water or fluids in your body? You mentioned glucose. Does dehydration also cause your brain to be foggy or not, kind of function well cognitively?
Yeah, of course. I mean, hydration is extremely important for the brain, like it is for the other parts of the body. You have to have, some people say that at least about 2.5 liters of water every day or some form of fluid intake. Hydration is extremely important for all natural metabolic processes to take place.
Mhm.
And I mean, it even combats for hunger.
Right.
So it's very essential that you're constantly hydrated in order to prevent any kind of impairment to your brain. Sometimes you can have uh, water and salt imbalances and hyponatremia and all these conditions because water metabolism is linked to salt metabolism, etc. And they can have a huge impact on the way the brain functions.
Right. I was, I mean, it sounds so wonderfully complex. I was listening to a talk by a psychiatrist recently, and he said that, when that our brain starts changing a lot before we actually see the signs of Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. So if you start forgetting the way to your house suddenly, or you cannot recall things, it is actually not an early stage, but a late stage in these diseases. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so see, uh, general forgetfulness is very different from Alzheimer's. If you forget where you've kept your keys, or
Right.
if you've forgotten someone's name, you've forgotten where you've kept your spectacles, that's not much of a worry. But yes, if you specifically forget your way back home
Mhm.
from work, or you've forgotten what you had for breakfast in the morning, things like that are pretty alarming. And yes, Alzheimer's is one of the commonest causes of dementia, and we pick it up usually 10 to 20 years later after its onset.
Right.
So people have started noticing changes, but the symptoms are usually mild and very indolent before they manifest in its full form.
Mhm.
So that's true. Symptoms start, especially in women. They may even start, just around the time of menopause,
Right.
is when people say that women could be susceptible to having Alzheimer's. Actually, if you look at women who've had early hysterectomies done
Mhm.
and removal of ovaries done, there probably is a hormonal link as well, and they have a 70% chance of having Alzheimer's a decade earlier than uh, their uh, non-hysterectomized counterparts.
Right. Right. So is there something, talking of menopause? Is there something that women can do to keep their brain more agile? Because I have been talking to some gynecologists who also say that menopause does have an impact on the cognitive functioning of the brain, and it can be seen in some women, in their 50s and on. Will you tell me, they can probably do something about it?
So it's really difficult. It's all in the nascent stage of what you can do because it's probably some kind of a hormonal change,
Right.
and nobody really knows what that is. Whether it's estrogen, whether it's progesterone, whether I mean, a lot of women were just empirically once upon a time put on hormonal therapy once they reached menopause, and that didn't go down too well in a couple of studies. You know, estrogen is, while it's a very strong neuroprotective hormone, it does have its side effects as well.
Mhm,
So it's definitely hormonal
mhm.
because it's the only major life event that takes place in women's life, and that forms a marked time period which you can determine before menopause and after menopause. Changes can be studied, and women who've had early menopause have found to have had an higher incidence of Alzheimer's.
Right.
So it's definitely hormonal. Now what you can do to prevent it is nothing different from, you know, eating a great diet. You People say that you have to have foods that are brain foods,
Mhm,
or foods that promote brain health. Green leafy vegetables is excellent. Berries and nuts are supposed to be excellent for brain function.
mhm.
Omega 3 fatty acids supposed to be good for fish, is supposed to be good. uh, Sugar in all forms is universally bad, even for the brain.
Right.
You can get your glucose from other natural and sources rather than refined and processed sources. And the other real great thing that has been consistently been found to be good for brain health is some amount of moderate exercise on a daily basis. 20-30 minutes of a brisk walk every single day, constantly moving, keeping agile rather than leading a sedentary life,
Mhm.
is what really promotes brain health, not just for women, but generally for everybody.
Right. Just to follow up on my previous question, when you spoke about Alzheimer's and how we start seeing the symptoms much later, this does it imply that we should people should be getting MRIs by the time they are 40 or 50, so that I mean, if if they do have any condition that might kind of affect them later, it can be detected early.
Yeah, see, the thing about Alzheimer's is it's very difficult to pick up very clearly with an MRI, for sure. I mean, it'll show you atrophy. Only now, recently, very, very highly advanced studies are beginning to show the plaques of Alzheimer's in very high resolution images, and those are usually reserved for research purposes.
Right.
Also, adding a PET scan to it, which is a metabolic imaging,
Mhm.
really helps in diagnosing Alzheimer's early on. But whether it's going to to get for everybody in their 40s and 50s to get a brain scan done to see whether they're going to have Alzheimer's may not be a feasible approach. One has to really figure out with we are doing some collaboration with certain companies that are working on AI,
Right.
and with the use of AI technology, we are able to look at millions of scans that have had Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia, and then uh, collaborated with MRI evidence, and then see discern a population that might be at higher risk and probably scan those rather than just scanning the entire population.
Right.
And in that meantime, I guess just focus on maintaining brain health in a regular fashion, like we discussed earlier.
Right.
I think
Right.
that would be the key. But scanning everybody in their 40s and 50s, I don't think is economically feasible, or unless you have an extremely high incidence of a particular illness or disease in a specific population. Yes, then definitely it makes sense.
Right.
But for a population as large as ours, I don't think it'll work. We need to still figure out, fine tune some things before we can get to that kind of a situation.
Right. So when you say at risk groups, who are the people who are more at risk? Could you define at risk groups for me?
So, I mean, you have to look at multiple things. You have to look at a genetic disposition. So,
Right.
if you have a history of mental illness in the family,
Mhm.
then you are an at-risk group for having mental illness. Doesn't mean that you'll necessarily have it.
Right.
Similarly, if you have certain brain cancers in the family, you become part of an at-risk group for having. It's exactly the same with breast cancer or any other, for example, stroke,
Correct.
uh, or heart disease. So it's the same philosophy. So if you have the genes for it,
Mhm.
it's possible that either a mutation in the gene or some factor associated with chance or luck may manifest, and you may become part of that statistic. So that forms an at-risk group. So you have to study family history to determine whether you could be susceptible to be having any of these conditions.
Right. I've also read that people have as much as a 50% chance of being diagnosed with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia if you live to be 85. So it's 1 in 2 people at that age. Is there something that people can do about it? I know that you said exercise and food, but what else?
Yeah, not really, to be honest. I mean, besides the regular functioning, I mean, once you get diagnosed to have Alzheimer's, there's a little bit of medication that can help, but there's no cure. It's a neurodegenerative disease.
Right.
Same thing with Parkinson's. It's something you can alleviate symptoms for a bit, but eventually it's going to come back.
Mhm.
So uh, there's really, I mean, once you're 85, uh, and you have a little bit of Alzheimer's, I think in today's day and age, you just consider it part and parcel of your life. But if you start early uh, in taking care of your health,
Mhm.
it's possible that you may be able to delay its onset. And taking care of your health in the terms that we discussed: diet, exercise, some form of meditation, or some form of spiritual practice, if that goes down well with you.
Right.
Uh, and all these other basic things that people talk about to keep functioning well.
I've also read that caffeine, nicotine, and conditions like hypertension, heart disease, a sedentary lifestyle, they're all supposed to hurt your brain because some of these constrict the blood flow to your brain, which can cause neurological disorders later in life. Will you talk to me about it?
So smoking is the worst.
Right.
If there's one health advice you can give anybody for
Mhm.
anything overall, is to stop smoking,
Mhm.
because smoking hardens the vessels and it causes deposits in the arteries, and that eventually causes narrowing of blood vessels, and then that causes hypertension, which eventually causes heart diseases, brain disease, and whatever damage that is done.
Right.
Caffeine, to some extent, it's controversial. Some people say caffeine is not that bad. Some people say caffeine is in large doses not a good idea. But smoking is definitely proven 100% to cause damage. So, and smoking results in high blood pressure, cardiac problems, stroke. The other real thing you can do is mobility, is to keep mobile. It doesn't necessarily have to be exercise, but again, they say sitting is the new smoking.
Mhm.
So you don't remain in one position for more than 20, 30 minutes. Walk when you can take the car, or take the stairs when you can take the elevator. Those kind of things of just constantly being mobile. I think that's the key in being able to prevent any kind of long-term heart or brain issue.
Right. We are all, of course, curious about smartphones, about our laptop usage, and I believe there aren't that many studies out there yet. But could you talk to us about the long-term impacts of laptop usage, of smartphone usage, on your spine and as well as on your brain?
So spine is very clear. I mean, we've because people are constantly on the phone, they're looking down. We're getting patients with degeneration of the spine earlier. We're getting people walking with hunches earlier. People slouching more. So it's definitely, they say looking at the phone for 30 minutes is equivalent to putting a 20 kg weight on your head for half an hour.
Wow.
So uh, we've seen a lot of young people nowadays come into the clinic with slip discs, with early degeneration of the spine,
Mhm.
and poor posture. It's definitely related to smartphone use. It's definitely related to long-term use uh, of the laptop in ergonomically improper positions. I mean,
Mhm.
ideally, the computer screen should be at the eye level. your shoulders should be nice and relaxed. Everyone's in really funny positions all through the day working on their computers. And now with this work from home business, people are spending 10 and 12 hours in front of a computer screen with very little real social interaction.
Right.
And that definitely impacts. I mean, and the brain, in some sense, uh, especially children, it's not allowing them to really interact with adults. It's not really allowing them to imagine stuff. They are constantly getting passive information. Their imagination is not allowed to be active.
Right.
So, I mean, as compared to reading, which enhances focus and concentration during, especially the first 3 years of life, when the brain really develops in its full abundance. Uh, Screen for children may not be a very good idea. People are debating the fact as to what is the optimum amount of screen time. Above the age of 3, they're saying 1 hour a day probably would be the max.
Right.
Again, the problem with something like the screen is it lures you, it gives you instant gratification, especially if you combine it with social media, etc. That plays with the dopamine levels in your brain, and dopamine is associated with pleasure.
Right.
So you get something immediately, you're able to, you think you're multitasking, you're able to check email while looking at your Instagram feed, while checking what's on the news and all of those things. It actually may not be a very good thing. It's not allowing specific areas of the brain to develop. It's causing some kind of a circuitry issue. When people boast about the fact that they can multitask, I don't think it's a very good idea. It's not enabling people to remain focused on what they should be doing.
Right.
So I think in that sense, it's not a very, very good idea. If you can have some time off your screen and be able to focus on what you're doing, all of those things really make a difference. We are unable to quantify these things right now,
Yeah.
but I'm sure as the decade progresses, we'll be able to know. There's a definite role of technology, and all of those things have a very, very positive impact and value in our lives, and you must not shun it, and you must use it to its advantage, knowing how it can harm, and then probably sidetrack uh, whatever is harmful.
Right. That's very that's something very interesting you said about learning and having an imagination. My next question was going to talk about learning, and the correlation between learning and brain function. We are often told that the moment you stop learning, your brain becomes slower. Is that true?
Yeah, in some sense it is. I mean, you consider the brain another muscle, for that matter. I mean, the moment you stop really using it, it's going to atrophy or disuse.
Mhm.
So uh, you have to keep at it. You have to keep learning something new. I mean, they say learn a musical instrument at a later age in life to keep you going. Learn a new language. Learn anything that helps bolster connections and allows your neurons to work with one another on a larger scale. Establish these connections in your seventh, eighth decade of life.
Mhm.
That's what learning does to the brain. I mean, I use a simple principle of trying to learn one new thing every day.
Mhm.
However, it may be just a new word, or it may be a new fact, or it may be something new, and if you can perpetrate that for the rest of your life, uh, it won't be too bad towards the end, I'm hoping.
So basically, we have to keep kind of exercising our brain. The
Yeah,
other
I mean, it's not magic, it's not rocket science.
right.
I mean,
Um,
even someone out of neurosciences will be able to tell you that.
right. The other thing that doesn't get talked about enough is how does your gut health impact your brain and spine function. I was actually reading about something called the gut brain axis, which is basically refers to a bidirectional relationship between cognitive and digestive behavior. Will you talk to me about
So, I mean, I think there's a huge amount of data that's coming up. They call the gut the second brain.
that? Hmm.
I mean, it's probably the only organ that contains its own independent nervous system, which has about 100 to 500 billion neurons etched into the gut wall.
Right.
It's so sophisticated that even if you disconnect the vagus nerve, which is the connection between the brain and the gut. It can still operate independent of the gut. But I mean, gut bacteria are responsible for programming your immune system, extracting vitamins and minerals from the food that you eat, as well as building and fortifying your gut wall in order to keep out pathogenic invaders.
Mhm.
So, uh, in addition to these functions, they produce hundreds of neurochemicals that aid in communication between the brain and the gut,
Mhm.
which the brain uses for basic psychological processes such as memory, mood, learning, and all of those things. Even some hemorrhagic brain lesions called as cavernomas, they are linked to specific gut bacteria metabolites and due to an imbalance between specific type of microbacteria. So when they say you are what you eat, etc., I mean there is some truth in it. But how do you regulate this gut flora? How do you increase the level of omega 3 fatty acids? How do you get rid of the omega 6? How do you maintain, some amount of, so, and the use of good dietary fiber, inulin, or whatever. A lot of these things, a lot of just diets can change autistic children.
Yeah.
Diets There are diets that are prescribed for children whose brains are underdeveloped or have sustained some kind of insult, and they have shown benefits. We really don't know uh, how this works. We're still studying it in great detail, but there is a science to it, and the gut bacteria definitely affects how the brain functions.
Well, that's quite fascinating. I mean, I'm getting to learn so much about the brain. The brain is truly a fascinating organ to know about. I just want to kind of sum up the whole thing with the most important question, that how do we keep our brain young and agile? I mean, you've already touched upon the things that we can do, but if you could just kind of sum it up for me, should we be doing puzzles? Should we be learning new languages? Should we exercise more? If you could just kind of summarize it for me.
So I think if you were to sum it up, it would be diet. Watch your diet.
Mhm.
Then keep some amount of physical activity going.
Mhm.
Uh, Maintain good interpersonal relationships with people.
Mhm.
Have a community of close friends who you can depend on.
Mhm.
Uh, Extremely important is some form of social interaction. I mean, you can solve puzzles. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that, and that's going to help you with all of that. Learn a language, play a musical instrument, sleep adequately, 7 to 8 hours every single day. And I think overall, holistically, that would take care of brain function, in my opinion.
Right.
Then whether you're predisposed to getting problems and then you deal with them, it's a different story. But if you follow these basic, have some kind of a routine, try and follow a disciplined structure of doing things, keep constantly keep being motivated, enter into some form of a breathing or a meditation or a spiritual practice on a daily basis. So devote your time to not only physical, mental, but even in emotional health, and that eventually, I think, plays a big role in maintaining a healthy mind body connect.
Right. Well, that's this was extremely enriching for me, and thank you for sharing all this information with us and having a wonderful conversation with us. I have literally learned a lot today, and I hope that our viewers feel the same way. So, thank you so much for talking to us.
No, it's my pleasure always. It's great to talk to you and I hope to chat with you soon again.
Absolutely.